Sergeant Kelvac settled into his worn seat at the corner of the outpost cantina, his chitinous exoskeleton bearing unusual scars that no coalition medical technology could fully repair. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the tables where young recruits had gathered, drawn by whispers of his legendary service alongside humans during the Nexus incursion. "Is it true you served with the Deathworlders?" asked a fresh-faced cadet, mandibles clicking with nervous energy. Kelvac nodded slowly, his compound eyes reflecting the soft blue glow of the atmospheric lamps. The movement caused his damaged left antenna to twitch involuntarily. "I was assigned to Earth, classified as Deathworld XJ7, under Lieutenant Minho's command." The 6 recruits exchanged skeptical glances. They had all heard the exaggerated tales of humans, beings who supposedly survived conditions that would kill most sentient species in the coalition. One recruit, bolder than the rest, pointed to the twisted scar tissue that ran across Kelvac's thorax. "This?" Kelvac ran a claw gently over the warped chitin. "Acid rain. Just another normal day on Earth, according to my human squad mate Subin." "Impossible," hissed the youngest recruit. "No species could evolve on a planet with regular acid precipitation." Kelvac made the characteristic clicking sound that passed for laughter among his kind. "Humans don't just survive it. They carry special shields and keep walking. Their outer covering, skin they call it, can heal from chemical burns that would permanently damage our exoskeletons." He gestured to the bartender for another round of nutrient solution. The recruit's skepticism was nothing new. He had seen the same disbelief in his own reflection when he first received his assignment to the Human Joint Task Force 20 cycles ago. "Earth defies every classification system we have," Kelvac continued. "Crushing gravity that would collapse, your breathing tubes, daily temperature swings that would trigger emergency hibernation in our kind, atmospheric oxygen levels that would be considered dangerously flammable on most coalition worlds." "Then how do they build technology?" asked a recruit. "How do they not burn their planet down?" "They adapt," said Kelvac simply. "Their buildings use materials that resist their extreme conditions. They build machines that function in their high gravity. They even developed spaceflight while still fighting wars among themselves." The recruits chittered amongst themselves. The idea seemed absurd. Developing interstellar technology while still engaged in intraspecies conflict went against every developmental theory taught at the academy. Kelvac leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low hum. "You think I'm exaggerating? Let me tell you about my first day on their world." The cantina seemed to grow quieter as other patrons sensed a story worth hearing. Even the bartender slowed his movements to listen. Our diplomatic vessel entered orbit around the blue-green planet. The gravity warnings flashed across every screen. The atmospheric analysis listed 16 different compounds labeled as potential irritants. The temperature readings showed regions ranging from frozen solid to hot enough to cook protein. He paused for dramatic effect, enjoying the rapt attention of his audience. And there, standing in the docking bay to greet us, was Lieutenant Minho, wearing nothing but a thin fabric covering and smiling like we were meeting in a pleasure dome on Centauri Prime. "No protective gear?" asked one recruit, antennae straight up in shock. "None. Not even respiratory filters." While our entire delegation was sealed in full environmental suits, sweating and struggling to move in the gravity. Kelvac's mandibles clicked in amusement at the memory. Minho shook my hand, broke 2 of my digits without even trying. He apologized profusely, saying he forgot his own strength in our gravity adjusters. The recruits looked at their own slender limbs, trying to imagine the dense musculature required to survive in such conditions. That night, they held a welcome feast. The humans consumed substances that would sterilize medical equipment. They called it spicy food and alcohol. They breathed air filled with microbes that would cause systemic infection in any of us. And they laughed. They laughed while living on a planet that wants to kill them every day. Kelvac raised his drinking appendage to humans, the species that evolved on a planet trying to murder them and somehow turned it into strength. The recruits raised their own drinks in a toast, their earlier skepticism giving way to fascination. But Kelvac knew this was just the beginning of his story. He hadn't even gotten to the siege of New Daegu or the impossible choices made there. For that, they would need another round of drinks and stronger nerves. The young recruits leaned forward as Sergeant Klovax continued his tale. The cantina had grown quieter, with even other patrons turning their attention to the scarred veteran. My first real mission alongside humans changed everything I thought I knew about them, Klovax said, his damaged antenna twitching at the memory. 3 cycles after landing, I was assigned to Lieutenant Hyunwoo's reconnaissance unit. Klovax described how the human officer had presented himself at the Coalition barracks before dawn, already fully equipped and alert despite the early hour. We were to survey a mountain range for potential mining operations, Klovax explained. Our briefing indicated stable weather and moderate terrain. The sergeant paused to sip his nutrient solution. The humans have a saying, "If you don't like the weather on Earth, wait 5 minutes." I learned its truth that day. Their transport had deposited the mixed squad at the base of the mountains. While the coalition members carefully checked their environmental protection gear, Hyunwoo and his human subordinate Ji-yeon simply wore lightweight uniforms and carried small packs. I asked Ji-yeon where her protective equipment was, Klovax recalled. She looked confused, then laughed and pulled out a thin collapsible hood from a pocket. "Just in case," she said. The mission progressed normally for the first hour. The coalition members struggled with the gravity and rough terrain while the humans moved effortlessly, often doubling back to check on their alien companions. Then, the sky darkened, Klovax said. Not gradually, but within minutes. Angry clouds rolled over the mountains faster than our transport could return. The sergeant's compound eyes seemed to darken at the memory. Our atmospheric monitors screamed warnings. The rain on this region of Earth contained enough sulfuric acid to cause severe damage to our exoskeletons. The recruits chittered nervously. Acid precipitation was a hazard on several worlds, but always in predictable patterns that allowed for proper preparation. Hyunwoo looked at the sky and said only, "Shelter, now." No panic, no fear, just calm assessment. Klovax clicked his mandibles together. The nearest cave was 400 meters away, 400 meters through what would soon be liquid that could dissolve our outer protection. The humans had sprung into action. Ji-yeon distributed emergency shields, small devices that projected temporary force fields to each coalition member. Hyunwoo plotted the fastest route to safety. "We were halfway to the cave when my shield malfunctioned," Klovax said, tracing the twisted scar tissue across his thorax. "The first drops hit me like tiny explosions. I froze in pain and fear." The recruits were completely silent now, envisioning the scene. Ji-yeon didn't hesitate. She removed her own shield and placed it over me. Then, and I still cannot fully comprehend this action, she lifted me and carried me toward the cave. Klovax's voice grew softer. Her skin blistered where the acid touched it. I could smell her flesh burning. Yet she continued step by painful step until we reached safety. Inside the cave, the human medic had treated Ji-yeon's burns with a simple spray. She had winced but waved away concerns. "It's nothing," she'd said. "Back home, I once fell into a hot spring. This is mild compared to that." When I asked why she would risk such injury for me, she seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Klovax told the stunned recruits. She said, "We're a team. That's what teammates do." The veteran took another drink, letting the implications sink in. That's when I began to understand. Humans don't just survive on their death world. They formed their entire society around mutual protection against it. What seems like reckless courage to us is simply their normal response to danger. One recruit raised a hesitant appendage. "Did her skin heal? From the acid?" Klovax nodded. "Within weeks, there was barely a mark. Their bodies repair damage that would be permanent for us." But more remarkable was that she never mentioned it again. Never asked for recognition or repayment. He leaned back in his seat. Later that cycle, I witnessed humans walking through a snowstorm that would trigger hibernation in our species. I saw them casually handle materials hot enough to melt chitin, but nothing impressed me more than their willingness to endure pain, for others without question. The recruits exchanged glances, their earlier skepticism completely vanished. "Remember this," Klovax said, "when you meet humans. Their bodies are formidable, yes, but their true strength comes from elsewhere, and that is what makes them the most dangerous and valuable allies in the galaxy." Klovax paused to let his previous tale settle with the recruits. The cantina had grown even more crowded, word having spread that the scarred veteran was sharing his experiences from the Nexus incursion. He adjusted his position, easing pressure off his damaged leg joint. "You think acid rain and extreme temperatures are impressive?" Klovax's mandibles clicked softly. "Let me tell you about the siege of New Gyeongju." The recruits leaned closer, sensing they were about to hear the heart of his story. "It happened during my second Earth year," Klovax began. "Humanity's first colony beyond their solar system was thriving on Kepler 22b. They named it New Gyeongju after an ancient Earth city." He described how the colony had been built to human specifications: heavier gravity than Coalition standard, oxygen-rich atmosphere, and temperatures that fluctuated widely between day and night. "The Nexus swarm arrived without warning," Klovax continued. "For those too young to remember, they were not like us, not even truly individual beings, more like a hive mind controlling billions of insect-sized machines." The youngest recruit shuddered visibly. Even decades later, the Nexus remained a frightening bedtime story for Coalition young. 3 Coalition battlecruisers were in orbit when the attack began. We deployed all troops, including my joint human coalition unit under Captain Junho. Klovax's voice grew darker as he described the initial battle. The Nexus had targeted the colony's environmental systems first, a standard tactic to eliminate resistance quickly. We fought for 36 Earth hours straight. The Nexus adapted to our weapons faster than we could modify them. They learned from every encounter, becoming more efficient at killing with each wave. He described how Coalition Command had deemed the situation hopeless. Evacuation orders were issued, but with most ships already destroyed, there was no way to save everyone. That's when Captain Junho proposed something that seemed completely insane. Klovax paused for effect. He wanted to deliberately collapse the main colony dome. The recruits chittered in confusion. "You must understand, the dome protected 10,000 colonists from the planet's natural atmosphere. Too thin for humans, too cold at night, too hot during day. Destroying it meant exposing everyone to conditions that would kill most species." Klovax described the heated argument with Coalition Command. The plan was rejected as suicidal. No rational species would intentionally destroy their life support. Junho looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes the only way to survive is to embrace the thing trying to kill you." Then he and his human squad disconnected their communications and went rogue. The sergeant's eyes seemed to grow distant with memory. They blew the dome's main supports while the rest of us were being evacuated. The Nexus, thinking they had won, swarmed inside. What happened next, Klovax explained, defied everything he thought possible. The humans had prepared their people. Each colonist wore a minimal breathing apparatus and thermal protection. As the atmosphere thinned and temperatures plummeted, humans kept fighting. Their bodies, evolved on a world with similar challenges, adapted. The cold slowed them, yes, but it completely froze the Nexus's biomechanical components. Klovax described watching in awe as humans operated in conditions that would have killed any Coalition species within minutes. Junho's team had modified their own physiology through emergency procedures, injections that changed their blood chemistry, compounds that prevented their tissues from freezing. They fought in near vacuum, harvesting disabled Nexus components to build a weapon against the main swarm. The recruits were silent, trying to imagine beings who would voluntarily subject themselves to such conditions. 3 hours later, the colony's fusion reactor reached critical mass exactly as Junho had planned. The electromagnetic pulse destroyed the remaining Nexus units. By the time Coalition reinforcements arrived, humans were already rebuilding their dome. Klovax looked around at the stunned faces. "Coalition military doctrine teaches us to minimize risk, to preserve forces. Human doctrine sometimes embraces death to defeat it." He clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The official report called it an unorthodox but effective tactical decision. Those of us who witnessed it called it what it truly was, a glimpse of why humans dominate a planet that should have killed them long ago. The atmosphere in the cantina had shifted from curiosity to something deeper. The young recruits now watched Klovax with a mix of awe and unease. His tales of human resilience were inspiring, but there was clearly more to the story. Klovax sensed their changing mood and nodded slowly. "Don't misunderstand," he said, his voice growing softer. "Humans aren't invincible. The victory at New Gyeongju came with a terrible cost." The veteran raised his drinking vessel in a solemn toast, then set it down untouched. "After the battle, I found Captain Junho in the medical facility. Half his squad was there too. What I saw..." Klovax's antennae drooped slightly. Their bodies had paid a heavy price for their bravery. He described entering the hastily rebuilt medical wing. Coalition doctors had been overwhelmed by the human injuries, unfamiliar with how to treat such alien biology. Junho had severe tissue damage from the cold. Parts of his outer layer, their skin, had blackened and died. 3 of his fingers were lost completely. Klovax's compound eyes seemed to dim at the memory. Lieutenant Seojin had breathed the thin air too long. His lungs were damaged in ways their doctors said might never fully heal. The youngest recruit spoke up hesitantly. Did they regret their decision to destroy the dome? Klovax made a clicking sound that signaled deep thought. "That's what I went there to ask. I couldn't understand why beings would knowingly risk such permanent harm." He recounted sitting beside Junho's medical pod, awkwardly expressing what in his culture would be seen as criticism of a flawed tactical decision. Junho looked at me with those strange human eyes, just 2 of them, yet somehow seeing more than our compound ones can. He said, "Would you not lose limbs to save your hatchlings?" Klovax had been startled by the question. Of course, any coalition species would sacrifice for their offspring. It was biological imperative. But for strangers? For allies of another species? He showed me images of his home on Earth, Klovax continued. A coastal city frequently hit by massive ocean storms. He told me how his ancestors had faced tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, how they rebuilt again and again, carrying their wounded and burying their dead. The veteran's voice grew thoughtful. That's when I began to understand. Human resilience isn't just physical. It's woven into their society. On Earth, sacrifice for others is their highest virtue. Not just for family, but for community, for allies, even for strangers. Klovax described visiting the other wounded humans, finding similar perspectives among them. Lieutenant Seojin told me between painful breaths that on Earth, they have thousands of tales of individuals who gave everything to protect others. Their history records are filled with such stories, honored for generations. One of the older recruits clicked his mandibles questioningly. So their reckless courage comes from cultural indoctrination? Not recklessness, Klovax corrected gently. Calculation. Every human in that hospital bay had made a clear-eyed choice, weighing personal risk against collective survival. They had chosen pain, chosen permanent injury, not from fearlessness, but from deep understanding of what mattered more than physical comfort. He described a quiet conversation with the human doctor, who had explained how Earth's harsh conditions had shaped human evolution and culture together. Their bodies heal remarkably, yes, Klovax said, but more importantly, their minds accept. Suffering is sometimes necessary. The doctor told me, humans don't thrive despite pain. We thrive because we understand its purpose. Klovax looked around at the young recruits, seeing new comprehension in their postures. I had thought humans simply evolved to endure their hellish world, he concluded. I came to understand that their greatest strength isn't physical at all. It's their capacity to choose pain when it serves something greater than themselves. The cantina had fallen completely silent as Klovax reached the final part of his story. Even the bartender had stopped pretending to clean glasses and stood listening. The veteran's scarred exoskeleton seemed to catch the dim light differently now, the marks of his experiences no longer appearing as damage but as badges of honor. 15 years after the siege of New Gyeongju, I returned to Earth. Kovacs said, his voice warm with memory. I had been assigned as a diplomatic attaché to strengthen the alliance our shared victory had created. He described his arrival on the blue-green planet, this time without the fear that had marked his first visit. Earth's gravity still pulled. At him, its atmosphere still required filters, but he had come to appreciate the world that had shaped humanity. My host was Minister Dongwon, a former military officer who had served in the Nexus conflict, Kovacs continued. He lived in a coastal city called Busan, built where mountains meet ocean. The veteran described being taken on a tour of the city. What had amazed him most was watching human children playing in environments that would require protective gear for any coalition species. They swam in salt water, climbed under the harsh sun, and ate foods containing compounds that would trigger medical emergencies in his kind. Dongwon took me to a memorial garden dedicated to those lost in the war, Kovacs said. There I found Captain Junho's name, though he had not died in battle. The recruits chittered softly in confusion. Humans live such brief lives, Kovacs explained. While I still had half my lifespan ahead, the heroes I had served with were already gone. Junho had lived another 20 Earth years after the battle, his body never fully recovering from the injuries sustained at New Gyeongju. Kovacs carefully reached into a secured pouch on his utility belt. The recruits leaned forward as he withdrew a simple metal object, a steel combat knife with Korean characters etched on the blade. Junho gave me this before his death, Kovacs said, turning the weapon so light caught its edge. His family had carried it through 3 generations of service. He held the knife with obvious reverence. The inscription reads, "The stars belong to those willing to reach them." Kovacs looked around at the young recruits, noting how differently they regarded him now compared to when his story began. That is the final lesson I learned about humans, he said. Their brief lives burn so intensely. They accomplish in decades what takes our kind centuries. The human who saved my life at New Gyeongju died of age-related decline before I had even reached middle age. Yet in his short span, he traveled to the stars, fought a war, raised offspring, and helped forge an alliance that still stands today. The veteran carefully returned the knife to its pouch. Minister Dongwon told me something I have never forgotten. He said, "We know we don't live long, so we make every moment matter." Kovacs noticed several officers entering the cantina, looking for the recruits. "Ah, it seems your transportation has arrived. You are the first group selected for the new Joint Human Coalition training program on Earth." The young soldiers stood, their earlier skepticism replaced with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Remember what I've told you," Kovacs said as they prepared to leave. "Respect humans not just for their physical capabilities, but for their willingness to embrace pain for purpose. Learn from them. Let their perspective change you as it changed me." As the recruits filed out, the youngest turned back. "Were you frightened, going to Earth the second time?" Kovacs made the clicking sound of laughter. "Of course. But as humans, say the things that frighten us are often the things most worth doing." He watched them leave, these fresh recruits heading to the Deathworld that had taught him the true meaning of strength. They would return changed, just as he had, not just by Earth's harsh conditions, but by the remarkable beings who called such a world home.